And it's not required that you sign up except for the art session. And we need you to sign up for that one if you want to attend it, because we have supplies that we need to bring, so we have to have a sense of how many people. And space is limited for that, and if you've never been to one of Pam Jameson's art classes, you would really be in for a treat. So, and the other thing is, even though we're not requiring you to sign up, it's helpful for us to know, as far as room assignments, how many people we're going to anticipate for each class. So even if you can't make all the classes, if you're interested in coming to one of the classes, sign up here or online so we can assign the appropriate rooms and any other handouts and whatever that we need for the classes. So thank you very much.
Can you turn the lights down a little bit to improve the quality of the pictures?
In the Second World War, key battles were won and lost in the skies, and whether pilots were dogfighting in Spitfires or flying missions in B-7s and bombers, the danger of being shot down behind enemy lines was very real. Our next story is about a day when that nearly happened. If it weren't for a man who followed an extraordinary code of honor, Red Sharon joins us now with the story of this. Red.
Peter, sometimes in war, in the middle of the most horrible acts that humans can inflict upon each other, something incredible can happen, a true moment of humanity, if you will. This is not your typical Remembrance Day story. It's a fascinating one, just the same. On an August afternoon, a piece of history comes to town. When a B-17 bomber lands, as it did here in Winnipeg this summer, it always draws a crowd.
Beautiful airplane, but just please watch your head.
People are anxious to see the flying torches that dropped more bombs on Germany than any other aircraft in World War II. To touch its guns, to remember.
2,500-pound bomb.
96-year-old Jack Potier worked arming Spitfires on the British airfields over 70 years ago. He used to watch the big planes, many shot to pieces, coming back.
They come in pretty hard shape.
Oh, absolutely. It was unbelievable. You could see them flying with half the tail fin off, part of the wing nest that shot up. This B-17 landed, crashed, you see bumps in him, hit the aircraft that was on the ground, and hit the fellow sitting on the wing, took his head up.
Danger and death were never far away. Sometimes it took more than skill or even luck to get you back safely. Sometimes it took something else. This is the story of how one B-17 bomber crew made it home because of the enemy. The story of the Canadian connection.
This looks like Africa.
That is Africa.
Aya Stiegler's home is a monument of sorts to her late husband's flying accomplishments.
I mean, Franz flying was his biggest life. Whenever he put his move, what's his life? His first love. That is his father, mother.
Franz Stiegler's life ended in British Columbia, but he was born in the mountains of Bavaria. His father, a World War I pilot. As a young man, Franz and his brother August learned to fly in gliders they built themselves. As they grew up, the Germany they knew was changing rapidly. Adolf Hitler was capturing the imagination of disenchanted Germans.
I think a lot of people were hopeless, and a lot of people probably didn't even realize what was going on.
Hitler reinstituted conscription, soon started a world war, the second in a generation. Military service was not an option. Franz, however, chose to train pilots, and while his brother became a fighting ace, soon his fate would be sealed. This was right when his brother had been killed.
He was allowed to go home?
The death of his brother, shot down by the enemy, affected Franz Stiegler deeply.
Franz never had intentions of shooting down other planes, so being a hotshot, a hero to the nation, that was never part of his goal.
Author Adam Makos knows Franz Stiegler's story intimately, spent years researching it for his book, A Higher Call. He says the death of Stiegler's brother was a pivotal moment in his life.
At that moment, Franz changed as a person because the war suddenly became very personal. He fell victim to that human emotion, the want for revenge.
Start auf einem Feldflugplatz in Afrika.
The newly minted fighter pilot found himself in Africa under the watchful eye of Squadron Leader Gustav Rogel. Rogel had a strict code of conduct, especially when it came to the enemy. He told Stiegler, if I ever catch you shooting at a man in a parachute, a downed fighter, I will shoot you down myself. Mako says Rogel added something else.
Franz, it's not for your enemy that you do this. You do this for yourself, for your soul, so that one day, if God willing you survive this war, you can live with yourself.
A skilled fighter after Africa, Stiegler served in Sicily and Europe, and while shot down several times, he always survived and was on the verge of achieving the coveted Knight's Cross. Shooting down one more enemy bomber would do it. On the other side of the English Channel, the enemy was putting more bombers in the air every day. A young second lieutenant from West Virginia named Charlie Brown was getting ready to fly his first mission. As a rookie, he and his young crew, most barely 20, would occupy the most dangerous spot in the B-17 formation. On December 20th, 1943, almost as soon as they hit German territory, they were in trouble.
It was a terrible first mission. They were hit before they even got to drop their bombs. So they lost one engine, the nose got blown off. They drop their bombs, they fall out of formation. Another engine falls off. Next thing you know, German fighters swarm this plane. It was 15 to 1.
As luck would have it, Charlie Brown lost control and his plane fell through the sky. Losing their fighters went just barely avoiding a crash. But that's when Franz Stiegler got them in his sights.
Every foot of the bomber had a hole. He looks down the tail, and there he sees the tail gun. He sees the gunner is slumped over them. His head is practically missing. And the blood is actually streaming down the barrels of the guns.
In that moment, depicted here by artist John D. Shaw, Franz Stiegler, seeing the big bomber is crippled, commits an act some would call treason, punishable by death. After looking his enemies in the eyes, he decides to save them.
He says, this bomber with these 9 or 10 men aboard is the same thing as a man in a parachute. And he remembered that lesson from the desert. When he saw the wounded men on that bomber, saw their eyes, suddenly he saw his brother's eyes. He saw his brother's face. He saw his brother's last moment. And he realized that he was about to kill men just like someone had killed his brother anyway.
And he couldn't do it.
And he couldn't do it.
Instead, Stiegler escorts them right across German lines, staying just off the big bomber's wings so anti-aircraft guns wouldn't fire, then leaving them with a salute to limp back to England. Upon landing, Charlie Brown tells his incredible story, but not for long.
And the intelligence officer said, wow, this is incredible. I'm going to run this up the flagpole. And sure enough, the same intelligence officer comes back an hour later with a different look on his face. He's not happy. He says, Charlie, you can't tell anyone what happened. The brass is putting a lid on this thing. They
No
don't
medals, no recognition.
Exactly. They didn't want word of this to get out.
Brown would survive 26 more missions, finally getting to celebrate the end, without ever speaking another word about the German fighter pilot who saved his crew. Franz, too, would survive the war, only to emigrate to Canada looking for work. Marrying Haya, becoming a proud Canadian citizen, initially working in the logging camps where he was accepted as an equal.
That's why he went to Canada. And Canada, he had no problem. He always loved Canada. He always loved Canada.
But he never forgot that American bomber crew.
He says, you know, I always wondered, because he could talk about it before. And he says, I wonder what happened to that plane, whether they made it back to England. He always wondered.
Decades passed until one day France picked up a German military newsletter only to find a B-17 pilot named Charlie Brown was trying to find him. They exchanged letters, and on June 21st, 1990, in Seattle, Washington, 57 years after that fateful day, the two former combatants met. This footage was shot by a friend.
I was so angry to make the contract out there. Wasn't easy.
It was an emotional moment for Franz Stiegler. The two became best friends, traveling the country, speaking at different functions. Charlie Brown's nightmares of that fateful day stopped, and he eventually was awarded his country's second highest honor for his actions that day in 1943. Franz and Charlie both died in 2008, just 8 months apart. Franz Stiegler never got his Knight's Cross, but as he often said, he got something much better. And Peter, while researching the book, author Adam Makos found a private note that Franz Stiegler had written to Charlie Brown. In part it reads, in 1940, I lost my only brother. Just before Christmas, I had the chance to save a B-17 from her destruction. The pilot Charlie Brown is for me as precious as my brother was. Thanks, Charlie. Quite the story. Peter?
Man, I'll say. Thanks, Reg. Reg, we saw author Adam Makos there in Reg's story. He detailed the story of Franz Stiegler and Charlie Brown in a book. A Higher Call was published last year and spent 19 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It's now being published in France, Poland, Hungary, and yes, Germany. The film rights have also been picked up by Academy Award-winning writer Tom Stoppard. In the Second World War, key battles were
All right, this is Stiegler's hometown on the Danube River, fairly close to the Alps. And as you can see, it's just a classic Bavarian town, very peaceful today. Here's the center of Lamberg. Again, very peaceful. Quite a contrast to the horror that you've seen in this video. Picture of Franz Stiegler's first flight. Notice the progress that has been made even in glider technology. The Danube River, if you can put yourself into one of that glider, this is what the scene would be like that greeted Franz Stiegler when he took his first glider flight. You can see the Danube there and the foothills of the Alps to the right. Now, Franz was a member of a very devout Catholic family, and he was on the road to becoming a priest. However, he slipped out of the Catholic boarding school that he was at. He was 17 at the time, and met up with his girlfriend at the local brewery. Unfortunately, they were caught in the bushes by the Braumeister, who took him by the ear back to school, and there was a possibility he would be thrown out of school. A friend who was a member of the glider club that the family was a part of, Father Joseph said to Franz, you know, you have to rethink where you're going in life. What would you really like to do? And he said, I'd really like to fly. And so that took him to the next step. I should mention before we get there that the family had to go 40 miles to church. Franz was in the choir, and the family apparently was quite active, so that was 80 miles every week to meet the requirements of their faith. So he went to the University of Würzburg in order to learn aeronautical engineering. However, again, gets himself into trouble, dueling. And what he didn't realize was that dueling will qualify you for excommunication in the Catholic Church. And so his family had the embarrassment, his mother in particular, had the embarrassment of seeing his excommunication announced 6 times in a row at that regulatory meeting. So, again, you know, another misstep. One day, and we all have to remember the saying about beware of Greeks bearing gifts, beware of officials of the government bearing gifts. An official came to him at the University of Würzburg and said, how would you like to get away from this and get some real flight training, practical training, and we can get you into school right away and pick up the tab, which was fairly substantial. And so that's how he learned to fly a Junkers 52 airliner. And this is where he flew out. And I have a personal connection with this. This is over Wiesenfeld, which is the airport just north of Munich, where Hitler used to fly between Munich and Berlin. This was about a mile away from the caserta that I was stationed at in Munich. And looking northward, you could see the airfield at that time. Have any of you been to Munich and the Olympic Park? There's a hand, a couple of hands going up. All right, do any of you know why that hill exists? Okay, got something I can relate to you then. At the end of World War II, Munich had been so badly bombed that even patrols could not be sent through the streets. And of course, there was a tremendous cleanup effort, and each German on his way to work would load rubble onto a flat car. And then in the evening, they would do the same thing. And then when the flat car was loaded up completely, they would take it out to what is now the Olympic Hill. When I was there in Munich, there were shepherds and sheep grazing on that hill. And you could see the Alps in the other direction. So that kind of puts over Wiesenfeld in perspective. Now all of that is replaced, of course, by the Olympic Park. Okay, the first assignment that Stigler had was to find the so-called safest routes to London, to Rome, to Berlin, and also to Barcelona. And that ultimately got him involved in the Spanish Civil War. And at that point, even though he was in a civilian capacity, he was still doing military missions. He had no idea what he was taking in and so forth, but obviously he was taking in things to support the fascists in the Spanish Civil War. After that, he was reassigned, and this is a Heinkel 72 trainer. This is the kind of trainer that he was in. And there's an interesting story in the book. And I think it tells us something about the character of this man. He had a student who was about to flunk out. And his name was Gerhard Barkhorn. Basically, the problem with the student, do we have any pilots here, by the way? Okay. Well, one of the things I understand is that if you're going to be a good pilot, you have to fly by the so-called seat of your pants. You can't think the process through. And Gerhard Barkhorn was about to flunk out because he was so tense trying to think his way through flying. He had to relax. And finally, Stigler took him up on a flight an instruction flight, and Barkhorn is all over the place. And so Stigler takes over control and said, all right, fine, I'll take it from here. And he goes over a lake, and a nudist colony takes a roll of toilet paper and dumps it out from the cockpit. And all the kiddies down there are running for the toilet paper. And Gerhard Barkhorn loosened up so quickly, you know, he was ready to fly. And so Stigler said to him, now it's your turn. And he wondered, why did I have this roll of toilet paper down by my side? And from that point forward, Gerhard Barkhorn became an excellent pilot. He was an ace and ultimately became Lieutenant General in the German Air Force. Now, the story about August Stigler dying, there are two versions. The one that you got here, and if you get into the book, Augie dies taking off from a French airport. But regardless of the actual truth, that certainly did make a difference in Franz Stigler's life. He was assigned to Libya, and you heard the story about Gustav Ertl, and he was an anti-Nazi, and this was a surprise to me. Virtually everybody in the Luftwaffe was anti-Nazi with the exception of the guy at the top, Hermann Goering. So Ertl retired in 1971 as Brigadier General. Now there's an event that occurs. We heard about the Bremen airfield. I'd like you to keep that in mind because there's going to be a second anecdote, and it deals with Bremen, and we'll see how people are connected together. This is the North Sea coastline, and if you can picture on the ground, there were 88s, the most effective anti-aircraft weapon at that time, just ringed this whole area. No way you can get through except the way that Von Stigler got that plane through, the B-17. And of course, you heard the story about the top secrecy. Big question about why it took so long. I think it was maybe in the 90s before the story was fully released. But Stigler returned to an entirely different world. This was Germany post-World War II. He was a pilot, and the German people blamed the Air Force, their Air Force, the Luftwaffe, for not having protected them. And so he attempted to get into the defense industry in Canada and was highly qualified. No question he'd get the job, except they found out he was a Luftwaffe pilot, and he was disqualified. And so that's how he got into the lumbering business. And of course, you've heard about how the enemies met. Okay, I'm going to go on to a different segment, a different anecdote here, if you will, and some of you may have seen parts of this. Julie Harris plays the starring role. I'll move this ahead so we can get into the actual footage.
stillness of death. Oppressed, threatened, watched on every side by a power that would tear out all hope from the soul of man. The unhappy people of Holland can only pray in silence for those who have lost their voice, but not their hope or their vision in the struggle against the onslaught of barbarism. Long live the Netherlands. Coffee. In the parlor?
Morning, Mr. Timbo. I apologize for the intrusion. They're collecting all radios. I can see that.
A Dutch policeman assisting them.
You do want to be missed. The radio is?
Upstairs, in the parlor. Get it.
Too many beautiful clocks here. The variant? The cabinet looks as if it's a Berlin works. Yeah, 1886. You know watches? Clocks? My father was a watchmaker. I grew up on those workbench. And look what you've grown into. What district? Nothing wrong. Attenborough. Attenborough, 1895. Magnificent. But you should have seen the watch when it came in. The way some people treat a watch. No, kid. No. Understand. It was a gift on my 70th birthday. To Grandpa Tenbourne, from the children of Harlem, 26th of March, 1931. Get it on. Any other radios in the house?
No.
There.
I will not datter around
That was the first segment of The Hiding Place. If you have not had an opportunity to read it, I thoroughly recommend this. This is a marvelous story. We'll talk a little bit more about The Hiding Place and the Ten Boom family. This is where they lived in Harlem. Notice the size of the frontage. This was the watchmaker's shop. This is the family. It includes Corey. This is Betsy, Corey, father, Willem, mother, and Noli. The mother had passed away by the time of World War II. We're going to do a series of readings here. Marilyn will do the role of Corey Ten Boom.
Betsy poured a bowl of soup she had cooked for supper from a much boiled bone. The baby began a thin, high wail. I rocked it while the mother ate. Here was a new danger, a tiny fugitive too young to know the folly of making a noise. We had had many Jewish children over a night or several nights at the Bay, and even the youngest had developed the uncanny silence of small, hunted things. But at 2 weeks, this one had yet to discover how unwelcoming was its world. We would need a place for them far removed from other houses. And the very next morning, into the shop walked the perfect solution. He was a clergyman, friend of ours, pastor in a small town outside of Harlem, and his home was set back from the street in a large wooded park. Good morning, Pastor. Can we help you? I looked at the watch he had brought in for repair. It required a very hard-to-find spare part. But for you, Pastor, we will do our best. And now, I have something I want to confess.
Confess?
I drew him out of the back door of the shop and up the stairs to the dining room. I confess that I am searching for something. The pastor's face was now wrinkled with a frown. Would you be willing to take a Jewish mother and her baby into your home? We will almost certainly be arrested otherwise.
Miss Ten Boom, I do hope you are not involved with any of this illegal concealment and undercover business. It's just not safe. Think of your father and your sister. She has never been strong.
On impulse, I told the pastor to wait and ran upstairs. Betsy had put the newcomers in Willem's old room, the farthest from windows on the street. I asked the mother's permission to borrow the infant. The little thing weighed hardly anything in my arms. Back in the dining room, I pulled back the coverlet from the baby's face. There was a long silence. The man bent forward, his hand, in spite of himself, reaching for the tiny fist curled round the blanket. But for a moment, I saw compassion and fear struggle in his face. Then he straightened.
No, definitely not. We could lose our lives for that Jewish child.
Unseen by either of us, Father had appeared in the doorway. He asked me for the child. Father held the baby close, his white beard brushing its cheek, looking into the little face with eyes as blue and innocent as the baby's own. At last, Father looked up at the pastor and said,
You say we could lose our lives for this child? I would consider that the greatest honor that could come to my family.
The pastor turned sharply on his heels and walked out of the room.
This is the false wall that was created in the house to hide Jews. And it was designed by an architect, a famous architect in Europe. And the name was never known because in those days you kept secrets as closely as possible. There were an estimated 800 Jews that were saved behind that wall, plus members of the Dutch resistance. But one day they were betrayed, and many of the members of the family were taken to Schwenningen prison, a civil prison in the Dutch system. And this is where Corrie was interrogated by Lieutenant Rom.
For an hour, he questioned me using every psychological trick that the young men of our group had drilled me in. In fact, I felt like a student who has crammed for a difficult exam and then is tested on only the most elementary material. It soon became clear that they believed the Béguet had been a headquarters for raids on food ration offices around the country. Of all the illegal activities I had on my conscience, this was probably the one I knew least about. Other than receiving stolen cards each month and passing them on, I knew no details of the operation. Apparently, my real ignorance began to show. After a while, Lieutenant Roms stopped making notes of my hopelessly stupid answers.
Your other activities, Miss Ten Boom, what would you like to tell me about them?
Other activities? Oh, you mean you want to know about my church for mentally retarded people? And I plunged into an eager account of my efforts at preaching to the feeble-minded.
What a waste of time and energy. If you want converts, surely one normal person is worth all the half-wits in the world.
I stared into the man's intelligent blue-gray eyes. True National Socialist philosophy, I thought. And then, to my astonishment, I heard my own voice saying boldly, "May I tell you the truth, Lieutenant Roms?"
This hearing, Miss Ten Boom, is predicated on the assumption that you will do me that honor.
The truth, Sarah, is that God's viewpoint is sometimes different from ours. So different that we could not even guess at it unless he had given us a book which tells us such things. I knew it was madness to talk this way to a Nazi officer, but he said nothing, so I plunged ahead. In the Bible, I learned that God values us not for our strength or our brains, but simply because he has made us. Who knows, in his eyes, a half-wit may be worth more than a watchmaker or a lieutenant.
That will be all for today.
He walked swiftly to the door.
Guard, the prisoner will return to her cell.
Following the guard through the long, cold corridors, I knew I had made a mistake. I had said too much. I had ruined whatever chance I had that this man might take an interest in my case. And yet, the following morning, it was Lieutenant Roms himself who unlocked my cell door and escorted me to the hearing. Apparently, he did not know of the regulation that forbade prisoners to step on the mat, for he indicated that I was to walk ahead of him down the center of the hall. I avoided the eyes of the guards along the route, guilty as a well-trained dog discovered on the living room sofa. In the courtyard this time, a bright bright sun was shining.
Today we will stay outside. You're pale. You're not getting enough sun.
Gratefully, I followed him to the farthest corner of the little yard where the air was still and warm. We settled our backs against the wall.
I could not sleep last night, thinking about that book where you've read such different ideas. What else does it say in there?
It says that a light has come into this world so that we need no longer walk in the dark. Is there darkness in your life, Lieutenant?
There is great darkness. I cannot bear the work I do here.
Then all at once, he was telling me about his wife and children in Bremen, about their garden, their dogs, their summer hiking vacations.
Bremen was bombed again last week. Each morning I ask myself, are they still alive? After the shenanigan incarceration, Corey and Betsy were taken to the Fook concentration camp. It was the only concentration camp in the Netherlands. This is what it looked like then. This is what it looks like when we visited a friend over in the Netherlands in 2009. This is an area where 700 men were executed one night. Probably fathers and brothers of the women in the camp. They heard that atrocity occur. From Fook, the two sisters were taken to Ravensbrück, which is basically a death camp. It was a concentration camp for women's extermination, located just north of Berlin. Very, very difficult to escape. And now we'll continue with the readings.
I glanced down the long, dim aisle to make sure no guard was in sight, then drew the Bible from its pouch. It was in 1 Thessalonians, I said. We were on our third complete reading of the New Testament since leaving Scheveningen. In the feeble light, I turned the pages. Here it is. Comfort the frightened. Help the weak. Be patient with everyone. See that none of you repays evil with evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to all.
Go on, that wasn't all.
Always seek to do good to one another and to all. Rejoice always, praying constantly. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus.
That's it, Corey. That's his answer. Give thanks in all circumstances. That's what we can do. We can start right now to thank God for every single thing about this new barracks.
I stared at her and then around me at the dark, foul-aired room, such as?
Such as being assigned here, together.
Oh yes, thank you, Lord Jesus.
Such as what you're holding in your hands.
I looked down at the Bible. Yes, thank you, dear Lord, that there was no inspection when we entered here. Thank you for all the women here in this room who will meet you in these pages.
Yes, thank you, Lord, for the very crowding here. Since we're packed so close, many more will hear. Corey.
Yes, thank you for the very crowding here. since thank you for the jammed, crammed, stuffed, packed, suffocating crowds.
Thank you for the fleas and for
the fleas? This was too much. Betsy, there's no way even God can make me grateful for a flea.
give thanks in all circumstances. It doesn't say in pleasant circumstances. Fleas are part of this place where God has put us.
And so we stood between piers of bunks and gave thanks for fleas. But this time I was sure Betsy was wrong.
Much later in their stay,